Hey guys, it's me Astrid, and today I wanted to do a little video about my orchids for you. Please excuse the very messy state of my nails, the non-Vulcan status of my eyebrows, and the overall casualness of this video. I wanted to do a soft-spoken one for you, talking to you about one of my favorite things while making another one of my favorite things, ASMR. I love to watch it, so I hope that in making it, I can help other people have enjoyment as well. So, let's get started. This orchid here is a small Phalaenopsis orchid. You can see my hand is pretty close to the size of the plant. The leaves are pretty big, but the overall size of the orchid is pretty small and compact. I think maybe someone in the plant and gardening world might refer to this as a compact grower, although I think that is more reserved for Oncidium alliance, Pleurothallus, and other types of orchids more than a Phalaenopsis. That's because a Phalaenopsis, which is this orchid and probably the most common kind that you'll ever see in the store, this orchid is a, what was I gonna say? Oh right, it's a monopodial orchid. What that means is that it grows up from one center in the middle, and it grows out just out from the center. It doesn't grow other bulbs, it just grows straight up from the middle. Now there are lots of orchids that grow different patterns. They're called Sympodial orchids. Let me just reach over and get you one of them. So this is a Sympodial orchid. This is actually my Regiarnelli Eiler. I have two of them, and I've named them Darmok and Jalad. When I get a third one, I'll name it Tanagra. But anyway, you can see this orchid, it has bulbs. What happens is the bulb gets mature, it flowers, and then after it flowers, it starts growing new little growths. They start off looking like this guy. They get a little bigger and look like this guy. They start to look like this, these big tall leaves. And then finally they look like these ones in the back here. They have a bulb, tall leaves, and they're open. They can get a little bit wrinkly. This plant has actually been through a lot of tough times, but now, as you saw, it's putting out these new growths, so it will definitely take care of itself and recover. But that's the difference between monopodial, meaning one-footed, and sympodial, meaning what? Together-footed, I think. Is that Greek? I don't know. But anyways, back to this cute Phalaenopsis. I do like to nickname all of my orchids, even if they have an ID. Having an ID means you know the exact parentage of the orchid. So if you don't know the exact parentage of the orchid, you call it a no ID. And it's common, I think, for people to nickname their no ID orchids, but I don't think it's so common for people to nickname their identified orchids. But these are my babies, these are my children, so I have to give them names. I wanted to show you the flowers on this one. And you may say, what makes an orchid an orchid? Well, orchids are identified as having 6 petals, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the lip. And this is also a petal. It's hinged and beautiful, and sometimes in nature these play an advanced role in pollination. For example, Paphiopedilum orchids. This is a new Paphiopedilum I got. They have a lip down here, and this lip may look like a carnivorous plant appendage or something like that, but in actuality, this lip here is to have insects fall in, and then they struggle to get out. And then what happens is they pollinate the plant. And in other orchids, some orchids have a lip that snaps shut on the insect. And again, rather than eating the insect, it will just cause the insect to struggle to escape and then help the orchid pollinate itself. Orchids are amazing plants. This little rant is going to be kind of aimless about them, but I hope to educate you guys and make something relaxing. So yeah, this is my Phalaenopsis. The petals are actually sepals, and I think this one, and the lip are sepals, and this one, and this one are the petals. And they grow in 2 triangles. So you can see this part, and this part, they're all in a back triangle. And this part, and the lip are all in a front triangle. So a downward pointed triangle and an upward pointing triangle. Some orchids, I still haven't really figured out where all 6 of their petals are supposed to be. But I'm still looking. Sometimes petals fuse together in orchid evolution, so even though they still technically have 6 petals, it's not like actually physically able to be seen as 6 petals. Also, this orchid has a sunburned leaf. I apologize for the noise outside. So this leaf, I think, got a little sunburn or something, maybe a bacteria, but this little bumps, they've stopped. They're kind of translucent, and they just create a superficial damage to the leaf, usually. It's not spreading, I don't worry. I wanted to show you my Paphiopedilum again. So, this is my Paphiopedilum. Orchid lovers might describe this as a very cuppy Paphiopedilum because it has this little lovely lip. These are also referred to as lady slipper orchids. That includes Paphiopedilum orchids and Phalaenopsis orchids. I love this one. I don't know if you can really see the detail, but it has very soft, fuzzy hairs on its stem. It's like velvet. It's so soft. I used to be scared it would poke me, but then I started touching them, and it's so soft. Other Paphiopedilum orchids can have really wiry hairs and have things that look kind of like warts and blisters growing on these petals or sepals, whichever they happen to be for this plant. These stay in bloom for a very long time, as do Phalaenopsis orchids. Phalaenopsis orchids can stay in bloom for 1 month, 2 months, maybe even 3 months. And Paphiopedilum orchids, I think, think it's normal for them to stay in bloom for like 3 months, but I'm not totally sure yet. They stay in bloom for a long time. I'm not sure if Paphiopedilums are considered monopodial or sympodial. My friend Miss Orchid Girl, Danny, if you're watching, do you know? Because this orchid, it grows up from the center, but then to make new orchids and new flowers, it puts another baby from the bottom. So you'll have a little tiny baby that grows and grows, and it will get big and then open up just like this one. This is a Nivium type Paphiopedilum. These have really beautiful purple undersides to their leaves, as well as gorgeous, gorgeous mottled tops to their leaves. And I'm very highly attracted to leaves like this. Now I'm just noticing that this leaf has this very, I wish you could see it, has a watery surface, like a succulent plant almost, and the mottling color is beneath that surface. It's like looking into a pool with a mottled bottom. That's beautiful. But this is a new one. I am under the impression that these are a little more difficult to care for than other orchids, so I hope that I don't kill it. A difference between the Phalaenopsis and the Paphiopedilum, though these two look kind of similar and they have leaves coming up from the middle of these, is that this orchid is semi-terrestrial, meaning that it grows in kind of airy soil or rocks, but it grows more in the dirt. Many, many other orchids, I think most other orchids, are epiphytic, meaning they grow in trees, which is why it's important to have them not constantly wet in their roots. A Phalaenopsis will die if its roots are constantly wet. A Paphiopedilum, on the other hand, likes to have constant, even moisture, not sogginess, but moisture. So they like a lot of water, and these guys like a lot of water, but quite a lot less often. Now, I have something special to show you that's not actively blooming right now. It's a seedling. And this might look to you like it's grass or some silly thing like that, but in actuality, this is an orchid. This is Dracula lotax. This is a truly compact orchid. This is a miniature orchid, and I have it growing in a very special setup because Dracula orchids like to have very high humidity. They don't like their roots to dry out totally. I think it's a little bit too wet for my liking, but they like to stay nice and hydrated. Very, very, very humid. So what I've done is I took the clay pot that it's in and I packed moss all around the edges so it doesn't actually wet the plant itself, and I'm letting that evaporate in the air around it, creating a humid microclimate just around this particular orchid. Dracula orchids are the monkey face orchids. And this particular one is Dracula lotax. You can look it up. It's Lotax. And yes, their first name is Dracula, which is wonderful. This one will grow lovely, white, fuzzy, monkey-faced flowers in a little triangle shape with long red tails at the tips of each point on the triangle. And they're just beautiful. I'm really excited to see this one bloom. But I think it'll be maybe a year or two before I get to see that. But once they do start to bloom, they bloom throughout the year, which is a nice treat. A lot of orchids don't always bloom throughout the year, so that's nice. So I'll put this on top of your head if this were a role play. I wanted to show you another orchid. And again, this is another one that's not in bloom. this is in fact a rescue orchid. So it's in really bad shape, but just to show you how resilient orchids are, I'll pull this out. This orchid is growing in very loosely packed sphagnum moss. So it's just to keep the base of the plant hydrated and to keep the plant from drying out. This is a psychopsis orchid. And if you look up psychopsis orchids, I named one of the psychopsis orchids I have Gaypora gaybora, and I named this one Gui here because especially Gaypora gaybora reminds me of a psychopsis orchid. So I'll pull this out. This orchid came to me like this. It has pretty much no roots at all. And can you tell what this is? This is similar to the Oncidium orchid I showed you before. It has bulbs, and the bulbs are connected by a rhizome, and this bulb probably grew as a baby up and out from this bulb. So this is the baby and this is the mom, I think. Psychopsis orchids are special because their leaves are very cardboardy. I thought that this orchid was just really dried out and that's why, but no, they have really stiff cardboardy leaves. The amazing thing about this is that even though this is a rootless plant, this orchid has overcome, it's taken in the moisture and nutrients I've given it, and it has grown a little tiny root. It's growing another root from here. You can see that little tiny bump, but this is the main root it's growing. So that's going to start taking in moisture for the plant, and hopefully in a year or two, this plant will recover fully and get me some new growths, maybe give me a flower. Now, I'm just gonna take this plant, set it down in the moss again. It's hard to do, like, off the table, but just setting the moss on top of it, and I keep it moist. So yeah, there are tons and tons and tons and tons of different kinds of orchids. I have about 6 different genera growing in my room at this point in time, and that's not even a fraction. I showed you a Paphiopedilum, a Phalaenopsis, an Oncidium, a Dracula orchid, and there's more. I have dendrobiums in my room. They're characterized by having canes instead of bulbs. I have Phalaenopsis orchids in my room, which are Oncidium type orchids, but they like to have different flowers and more water and a different growth pattern. I have a Brassivola orchid in my room, and it's Brassivola nodosa cross grandiflora, and it just really looks like I'm growing a bunch of chives in a ball of moss right now. Additionally, I have even a Cattleya type orchid growing right now, and it's a Sophrolaela Cattleya, which is a cross of 3 different kinds of genera, and it's just, the world of orchids is immense and beautiful, and I really encourage you to get into it. Orchids are fragrant, some are stinky, some are lovely smelling, and some have no smell at all. A lot of complex hybrids don't have a smell. And let's see, orchids are classified by being bee pollinated, fly pollinated, or moth pollinated. So there's night fragrant orchids, sweet daytime fragrant orchids, and stinky orchids. A lot of bulbophyllum orchids are stinky because they're considered carrion plants. Anyway, I think that's enough discussion for today. I hope you enjoyed my soft-spoken discussion of my plants, and maybe you should check out Miss Orchid Girl's channel on YouTube and get into orchids yourself.